Okay, so what we found out was that there was customers looking to save costs on hardware and costs on the VMware. As we all know, that can get very expensive. I mean, if you think about it, you already have multiple costs on the DSS, the storage, the hardware components, the network, cards that you have, either 10 gig or 1 gig, also the RAID controllers. So how do you kind of cut these costs down? And it's something that we came up with that a lot of customers really like to enjoy. So if we look at this diagram, we have the DSS v7, we have 4 of them here. There could be more, but this is just to start off some ideas with you to help you save that money. So we're reducing the cost with many replications with the DSS v7 and VMware vSphere Hypervisor. So someone says, let me know that the sound is missing. If you guys can verify that, appreciate it. Let me know. We'll basically hold off and make sure everybody is hearing the sound. So let's go continue until it is. Okay, great. Looks like somebody said we can. Thank you. This is live and being recorded, so as you can imagine, it's a lot of workload on us to make sure that you do have proper sound. So let's continue. So what I have here is I have 2 physical DSS v7s. If you look on the left, you'll see of the diagram node A, and below it you see node C. So those are the physical systems. Those are the DSS v7 physical systems that we have. Obviously we have a switch, and then of course on the right side you will see that we have virtualized. We're creating virtual machines using the DSS v7. And so that saves you cost on 2 DSS machines that you have to physically build out. Now, you do have to have a physical machine for the VMware ESXi 5.0, but the ESXi 5.0 is free, so you can download that from VMware's website. Now, if we look at the first set that we have here, I've got a red line showing between node A and then the node B. On the right side, that is the virtual machine. So the physical machine on node A, I just did a simple diagram. If you notice, you only see 2 NICs in there, and I only assigned 2 NICs for the virtual machine for node B. This is just showing just the volume replication. So you can add even active passive to this, where I recommend you're going to need another NIC. You can use the web GUI management for that, so really 2 NICs, and use those for the auxiliary port and also for the virtual IP address. But kind of recommended to have a web GUI management NIC so you're not interrupting any services. But just the diagram itself is showing you how simple it is if you just look at node A replicating to node B. In either volume replication, which is synchronous at the block level, and of course you can do active passive. Now, if you look at the set below, you see DSS v7 node C on the left side, and that has encompassed 4 NICs. So we have 1 for the dedicated for the volume replication, and then 2 for the storage and virtual IP address that we have assigned. Now, normally, you can directly connect the volume replications NIC to the VMware server if you have, let's say, maybe a quad port NIC that you can dedicate. So you can directly connect that to the NIC and save yourself the port counts on the switch. So just keep that in mind, that you do have that flexibility, and we kind of do recommend, if you do have physical machines, connect them directly connected for the volume replication that is solely used for the volume replication feature that we have. Now here in this set, where node C will be working with the node D, the secondary node that we'll have, and we'll just kind of name it as primary node on the left and secondary node. But what we're doing here is we're using the active-active feature with DSS v7. So in that case, you will need more than 3 NICs in there. So you're going to need 1 dedicated for the volume replication. You're going to need 2 for the storage virtual IP addresses that are dedicated for each resources, for the remote resources and the local resources. And I'll kind of go over that. So I want to give you an idea of different ways that you can create and save money by eliminating the cost of hardware for the DSS v7 or v6, and also for the VMware ESXi costs of just being able to create virtual machines. So with that, we'll go ahead and bring up the DSS and what we have set up here for you. Let me go ahead and remove these screens here. And here we show that I have set up Node A as per the drawing that we talked about. And then, of course, that's the physical machine. And Node B is the virtual machine that we've created. And, of course, Node C is the physical machine. And Node D is going to be the virtual machine. So these two sets together are working together. And then these two sets will be working together. So what I've done is take the vSphere client, and I have local storage here. And of course I created a NAS share on one of my physical DSS machines, and I placed an ISO image of the DSS. So simply, it's real easy. When you create a new virtual machine, you specify virtual machine. Then what we do is we create typical, and I'll just run through this. A lot of this you guys already probably know. We'll just do this as a test. Let's call it DSS test. And then we're going to select this local data store. We're going to name Linux. And since we're Debian, I like to use this the 64-bit version because DSS v7 only comes with 64-bit. It does not come with the 32-bit. Only DSS v7 has that. v6. Here I'm setting up the NICs, so I can specify the amount of NICs. So we can go with just 4. Go ahead and specify the amount. I only need 2 gig, remember, for DSS, just for the installation. I can specify another capacity for the volumes that we can create. What we're going to do is we're going to edit the virtual machine settings before completion. So once we go ahead and continue, here we're going to be able to find the ISO image of the DSS that we have. And here we have this version of the DSS v7. So I'll go ahead and specify that to do the install. And then what we'll do is we'll go ahead and add new hard disk. So that will be for our volume that we're going to create. And there we go, add. So here, add hard disk, create new virtual disk. We'll set the default to the thick provision. And here we could specify the amount. So let's just say, for simplicity reasons, we'll just do 50 gig. And then create the default, select them, and you're fine. Now, when it comes to memory, here you're defaulting to 512. You pretty much want to give, I give about 2 gig of memory. And then for the CPUs, usually one is fine, but I like to add 2 CPUs with 2 cores. That way we're finished. Okay, so that's pretty much it. So now, that's all you have to do for the DSS to create your virtual machine. Here it is, a DSS test. Let's go ahead and start it up. And then you want to click on console. And then you are beginning to install. So here, if you run software installer, and then it's going to select the 2 that we've created for the 2 gig. So as it loads up, you'll have that installation ready to start. Now, we're not going to go through the whole installation process because it's kind of simple, and we also have webinars based on this that you can review. And as you can see, there's a few seconds, and we can do other things while it's loading up. So we can come back to that in a second. So here, you see that are the other 2 DSSs, that Node D on the left and Node B as well, that will be, those are the virtual machines. So let's go ahead and go to the DSS systems that we have. Scroll back down. So let's start with Node A. So if you remember in the diagram in Node A, these are just using the volume replication. So this is the physical machine. So if we look at the volume groups, all I really did was create an iSCSI volume. You want to make sure when you do the replications that they match the same size. So you want to make sure your source and destination are equal value. And keep in mind, you cannot replicate mixed match sizes, or if one is file I/O and one is block I/O. And we strongly recommend, by the way, for auto failover with active-active to use block I/O. So here is the iSCSI volume. Very simply create, many of you already know this, but for others who don't, you just click down and below, create new iSCSI volume, and once you do that, you can select your volume replication. And if you want to create the target automatically, you can. But it will start, and it will enable the LUN that you create. So you may not want that because you may want to copy the SCSI IDs. Once you go and you complete that iSCSI volume, you just go right over to the left and you'll see volume replication. And what you want to make sure, though, is you want to set one for source and one for destination. So let's take a look at our node B that we're replicating to. Again, we go to Configuration, Volume Manager, and Volume Replication. Now you see this is set up for destination mode. Now what's unique about the V7, which is interesting, is that if we go back to node A, we can actually start configuring the remote node, so we can specify the IP address of the remote node, where node B is the last octet of 222. And once you enable that and put the password to the node B, it'll automatically connect to. At which point, once you're done with that, then you're going to be able to create the task. And of course, you set up any task name. It'll see the remote node of the destination of node B that we have, and you'll see that you'll be able to set the values of the bandwidth. And the default's fine if you have just a few. If you have many, you want to probably divide that out. We do talk about that in other webinars, but just to move forward, that's pretty much how you set up. You start off, click the play button, and you're good to go at that point in time. Once you verify, once your volume replication is task has been started, you want to check the status of it. And very important is you want to see that they're both consistent. So here you would go to Status, and then you would go to Tasks, and you want to verify that they have completed before going to the final stages of creating the auto failover. So here you'll see the source. We see LV000 is consistent with the destination of this IP address like we talked about, which is the last octet of 222, which is our node B. So once those are consistent, then pretty much you can start your auto failover. But in the first diagram, that's what we're talking about, is being able to use the replication with a virtual machine of DSS V7. You can also do this with V6 as well. So there you can use the active-passive configuration as well. So that's what I want to show up. If you do, we'll just go over the steps real quick. Once you finish this part, you can go ahead and go to Configuration iSCSI Manager. And you want to make sure that your target names, your SCSI ID, and your LUN numbers are the same. So let's take a look at node B. One of the first things you want to do, if you change, they're going to be different. You want to make sure that these right up here where the targets, the IQN, you see 2012-09, node A-A, target 0, matches. So if you ever want to change it, it's very simple. You could do this right down in the bottom and make that modification there so they both match at the same side. So here, if we look up, we also want to make sure that the SCSI ID is the same for both of your replication nodes, and also the LUN number. So let's go back to node A and verify. So again, we go to Configuration, iSCSI Target Manager, and then select the target. And here we see the IQN 2012-09 node A-A, and then of target 0. So again, are we matching? And let's check the other side of node B, and we see that we are. So I just clicked on that tab and we verified. Again, we had the SCSI ID RU3 and the LUN number the same. Once you've done that, you're ready for the next step. And very simply, you just go to Setup and Failover. And what you want to have before you start, you want to make sure that certain things are done. Now, I've already set it up to save time. But here, once you are completed, it just gives you a basic readout. You want to be able to set your auxiliary ports. You need at least 2. Okay, so bear that in mind. Typically, you want to use the auxiliary port that's dedicated for the volume replication. Highly recommended, and it's also required. The other auxiliary port you want to use for one of your virtual IP addresses that you'll be assigning to those NICs. And then, of course, if you're doing MPIO, you can add more. So here are the ping nodes, which is necessary for the auto failover to communicate between each other. If they're not able to do that, then you could have an issue, whereas one of the nodes may not be able to communicate to a ping node, which will send an alert. Why is that important? Ping nodes are devices that are outside of where the DSSs are. So you're not going to use the internal IP addresses. You're going to use an external IP address or a device, a host on that same network. So what is really a good host system that you would use? A firewall, a router, a UPS, or the VMware server. And those devices have a larger uptime because they have dedicated UPSs. Even if you have a generator in the back, you still have the ability of a greater uptime. So here's my VMware server that I use, the .230, and the 1.1 is my router because I have independent UPSs on that. So I recommend to set at least 2 or more. You never know if you have an outage on a circuit breaker and it goes out and UPS is drained, you might want to use another one dedicated. So always keep that in mind. I always keep the defaults on the failover trigger policy, although you can set it for different variables. But again, the trigger failover on I/O errors is very important on any volume. In many cases we've seen in support tickets where the array controller has issues and there's multiple volumes. That can affect it. So you want to be able to, if this node A had an issue with its volume, you want to be able to have that trigger event to fail over to node B. So that way you have a greater uptime. Here's where the resources manager that we talked about. So my virtual IP address, and I've selected this volume that we have. If we click here, this is, remember we talked about node A, the target 0 that we used. This is where we're using the active-passive. You notice that the active-active, you would see this being used, so the resources are distributed equally, creating a load balance. And I'll show you that on node C and D. So what you want is to be able to make sure that all that's done, or you won't be able to add this task in here for your resources. And of course your virtual IP address. The virtual IP addresses need to be different than your local interface that you have currently here, and you also want to select it as well for the remote node. So this would be your active passive setup configuration. So now let's roll into the active. And again, you get all the information readout, the remote node status. Here you can see the ping nodes, they're reachable. If you just click here, it takes you right down to the details, so it immediately gravitates you to that. So it's really a simple setup, as you can see, and of course you have the ability to stop, but just make sure that your virtual IP addresses have been shut down with your initiators and your virtual machines. So let's take a look at node C and node D. Node C and D, what we have in this configuration is if we go to the volume manager and volume groups, and we go to VG00, which is my default volume group, we have 2 iSCSI volumes. So you need 2 iSCSI volumes to assist with the load balance. And node B has the same. The difference is that if we look at the volume replication, by the way, if we look at these sizes, they do match. You got to have them matched, and we'll take a verification of that so that we have an idea what I'm talking about to make sure that you set up in the future correctly. So if we look at node D in the volume manager, you see that they both are matching size. So we have 50 and then we have 20 gig for the other volume that we've created. Here it comes up. All right, so now let's take a look at our volume replication. With the active-active, you need to have one source and one set for destination. So here, I need for node C resources to have this first volume set as source. And if we look at node D, we have it set for destination, similar to the active-passive. But when we use the active-active, we want to make sure that on the next volume, that logical volume is set source on the remote node. And conversely, if we look here on the local node C, we have it set for destination. So this assists into the load balance. Now once you've configured this and your volume replication tasks have completed, as we talked about with the status, you'll see one is in reverse and one is direct and local. Now let's go look at our setup after we've already talked about setting up the SCSI target names being the same, the LUN numbers being the same, and the SCSI ID being the same. Once we've completed that, let's look at our setup. So if we go to failover and we've done our auxiliary ports, we've completed our ping nodes. Here we see that's already done. We have our 2 auxiliary ports as we discussed earlier. So one is assigned for the volume replication NIC, And of course, 1 is also assigned for my storage virtual IP address, NIC. And here I added 1 ping node. So I wanted to let everybody know you want to have additional ping nodes for better uptime and reliability. So if we look down, I kept the same defaults, and now we come down to the resource pool managers. Here you'll see that I have 2, and 1 for the local and 1 for the remote node. So this is important. Now, this is where the active-active comes in for the load balance. You can have many other volumes being replicated in here. So you can see that each of these will have the targets being replicated. So this is, if I wanted to move this to local, meaning I wanted to bring over the resources from the remote to local, I can do that. And why would you want to? Very simply, let's say you have many volumes here and you have a database that is growing and it's more resources that you need. And the other remote node, you can kind of switch them over. So that way you load balance a little bit. So you can easily just say move to local. So I could take the remote node and take its resources because it's right now acting as the source, so all the data is being written to that, and you want to move it over to your more advanced high power system that you've built. So let's move them back over, and we say yes. Now all data is still being written, so there's no delay. The users, your virtual machines, do not see an impact at all. So what it's doing is moving all the local resources and switching them over to a more powerful system. So it's done that quickly. It's very easy. It identifies and lets you know that the resources were moved successfully. And of course I can switch back. So I can push back over to its original remote location and just click on move, and of course it's going to sync, make sure the data's integrity is checked, and it's going to move it on. And data can still be written to this virtual IP address that we've assigned right here. Again, remember you want to have a different network address on the virtual IP address, so when you set up your VMware server and then set up your virtual machines, you want to create that environment. So here my virtual IP address, you'll see on the left, it's the 192.168.11.11. And of course, for my other resources right above, my local resources, I have it set for 192.168.10.11. So that way, on my VMware server, I'm connecting to, if I wanted my virtual machines, they will be in that part of that network. So when I set that up. So especially for your data stores, if you want to connect, or for your initiators, you want to connect to the 10.11 and also the 11.11. For MPIO, you're going to need additional 2 NICs, so it would be a total of 4 NICs. So you would have 2 for the local and 2 for the remote. So you need a total of 4 NICs per node. So just bear that in mind. So I just wanted to bring up to everybody up speed on how to do that. It's kind of interesting. Let's go take a look back by the VMware on our setup here on the new virtual machine that we've created. And here you'll see the install. And what we do is just to select the agree. And if you remember, we created a 2 gig and a 50 gig from the VMware data store that we had local. If we select, this is the one I want to install the DSS on. So we'll go ahead and select that. It's checking the source files. This is relatively fast on when it does the install. And so if we just give it a second or two, it just completes. Then it basically copies the files. And it's from the ISO image that we have because it verifies it. Then it starts copying the files from that NFS share that I've created, and that's very simple to set up with the DSS and the VMware, and I can show you that real quickly after this. So let's check the consistency, and it should be done right about now, and verify. Here we go. Now the installation is done and we're ready to reboot. What I usually do though is I do like to do a shutdown because I don't want to do a reinstallation. Why? Because in our virtual machine we set up in the settings to, when we boot, to connect to the CD-ROM. So I really don't want to connect to that ISO image anymore. So once this completes its shutdown, we'll go ahead and change that. And typically, if you don't know, remember, here it is. We'll just go right in here to the DSS-test, edit the settings, and you will go to the CD, DVD, and we'll just disconnect it and specify OK. So that way when we start it up, and let's go ahead and start it up, and it won't just roll into it. So and for setting up your NFS, I've created this this device here. It's on one of the DSSs, and to do that, it's very simple. You just go right into Add Storage, and here you select Network File System, Next, and of course set the IP address of the DSS server that you have. And the share that we created was called data. So you only do //data, and then of course put a data store name, and then click Next, and then Finish. And that's pretty much what I did here, and to be able to get that ISO image that we put in there. If we browse the data store, you can see that ISO image right there. So it's real simple to set that up. And if we look, you can see that the DSS that we've installed as a virtual machine for the V7 is loading up and being ready to be viewed. So it's very simple to see, and I hope that helps everybody. If there's any questions, you can certainly ask me any questions anytime after the show, and also you can always email us at open-e.com with the pre-sales@open-e.com, and we'll be happy to assist you. Thanks, everybody. Hope this helped you. Take care. Bye-bye.